Hello everyone, welcome to my Last of Us Part 2, Survivor difficulty, no damage, no crafting, no upgrades, no saves, no listen mode walkthrough, and this is Seattle Day 1 for Ellie's section. And this is one of the longest parts of the game if you choose to make it as such, because there are a lot of optional areas, there's a lot of level design that is heavily inspired by Uncharted The Lost Legacy with its wide linear design, which if you don't know means like pseudo open world design even though it's not open world. And you're going to a lot of areas for day one, and I've had to do a lot of editing to make this particular chapter less than 1 hour, since that's the maximum amount of time I'm allowed on SHAREfactory for uploading these videos. And it was a lot of hard work. I mean, if you want to see where I go from point A to point B, or if you want to see any of the moments where I pick up items that I don't need for these restrictions, if you're not caring about the no upgrade, no crafting, or no save part, check out my no commentary version of this walkthrough. I'll leave a link in the description for this particular section of the game. But I'm just going to transition directly to the part where the game really opens up after I input the code here. And compared to Uncharted The Lost Legacy, you are in no danger when you're out in the open. The only times where you will be in danger are when you go to specific locations, and there are two mandatory locations you need to go to: the synagogue and the courthouse. The other optional areas include this truck that I'm heading to right now, Rustin's coffee place, the bank, and also the music store. The bank is really the only location that's beneficial to me in this walkthrough because it has the shotgun. I don't know where else you get the shotgun, because what this game likes to do, and it's the same with the first Last of Us, is when you don't pick up a weapon, the weapon will appear in later locations, and even still, you can get the same weapon from other enemies if they have it, if you didn't pick it up earlier, which is really cool. And it definitely shows that the developers want you to have these weapons, because the Last of Us series flows better when you're using all of the weapons. There are a lot of grueling fights in the Last of Us 1 and the Last of Us 2 that really demand the full assortment of your tools. And I'm glad it's designed like that, because then it really forces you to respect the lethality of the enemies. And to add further proof of this, there are a lot of stealth encounters on this game where you don't even have to deal with the enemies, and you can completely get them done either by not killing them or by just doing stealth attacks on them. It's really cool that this game is pretty flexible with allowing you to do stealth or combat. I mean, there are a couple of mandatory combat encounters, but even still, though, you have the resources necessary to do them, and you have to express a lot of caution when it comes to doing some of these mandatory combat encounters, because the enemies on this game are very aggressive compared to the first Last of Us. But that right there is a jump scare that caught me out the first time, and she will attack you. So you saw me do a method just then where I went prone. She did an attack, which was not an attack combo, so I was able to start attacking her, and she didn't get any hyper armor. The way you want to deal with runners in melee combat is hit them 3 times, dodge so that you can get behind them, or you don't even have to dodge behind them, you can just dodge to the side, or dodge backwards, and then you can hit them another 3 times. It's very helpful you do that so that you don't knock them back with the final hit and cause them to do a counter attack. This will not work on stalkers, however. With stalkers, you have to hit them once, then you have to dodge behind them and start attacking their back, because when you start hitting stalkers from their back, they can't do that push move that allows them to get away. You attack them until you start hitting their front, and then while they're still flinched, you just repeat the process, and that is the best way to get rid of stalkers using melee attacks. You're not going to see me do that in this walkthrough, because I only discovered that particular method against the stalkers after I did my walkthrough. I mean, there are probably going to be certain parts of this walkthrough that I'll amend that will be slightly different to my no commentary version, because I want to demonstrate the best possible strategies ever. Like, for instance, with the Ellie boss fight, I found a really good speedrun strategy against Ellie that works very consistently, and I think I'll change what I did in my walkthrough to that newer part. I have the clip saved in my storage space, so you'll most likely see it. It's on my channel right now with the particular speedrun strategy that I used against Ellie, and I'll definitely put it into this walkthrough, and I'll definitely amend certain parts of this walkthrough. And for the parts that I amend, I will still use the exact same resources that I used for my original attempt at the walkthrough. But this stealth section right here is very easy. There's only 3 enemies that you have to deal with. There's that runner, then there's that second runner, and then there's this clicker here. There are a couple of resources here, but it's completely unnecessary. I mean, the resources that the game mainly gives you are just crafting resources, and since I'm not crafting, I'm not going to be going to a lot of these areas or sticking around in them for a while. So we've done that section, and now we are going to grab the stun bomb from here, and this is one of the locations the stun bomb can appear in. The stun bomb can appear here, or it can appear on the outskirts of a building, and it can also appear outside the Saravina Hotel. Once again, really nice design choice. I'm glad that the game gives you that option of giving multiple locations for an item so that you don't miss it. And the stun bombs are so helpful. The upgrade to them is horrendous. The smoke bombs on this game are useless, and thank God I'm not upgrading so I don't have to deal with that stupid upgrade to the stun bombs. I don't know why they made the smoke bombs the way they did, but the smoke bombs on this game are useless compared to the smoke bombs from the first Last of Us, and they don't even conceal you that well. It's very disappointing. But I'm going to pick up the machete over here, and then I'm going to skip directly to the courthouse garage fight. And this fight right here can be very tricky, but all you got to do right here is go all the way to the right, hop over this car, and just go all the way to the other side of this area. It's random how many enemies will follow you, but most likely the clicker is going to follow you in one runner. I'm going to try to shoot her in the leg, but my aim with the pistol is absolutely horrendous. I have so much trouble shooting the legs of these enemies whenever I use the pistol. And I think it mainly has to do with the fact that the pistol sways a little bit, and it's nowhere near as accurate as some of the other weapons you get later on. So I use up a lot of pistol ammo on this encounter. But Gina's getting grabbed right now, so I'm going to have to take care of these enemies very quickly. And that was very risky what I did just then. I could have been killed by that clicker easily during the strike animation because you get no iframes during the animation, and it lasts a little too long at times. So express a lot of caution when going for strike animations. I guess that's part of the risk versus reward system that this game tends to go for with some of its systems. But when you have a melee weapon like this, clickers do not stand a chance. And fun fact about the clickers, I actually discovered that if you grab a runner or any other enemy, and you let a clicker come towards you, the clicker will actually bite the enemy and kill it instantly. So you can use these enemies as shields as a way of dealing with clickers, and while the clicker is biting down on the enemy, they are vulnerable to strike animations, so if you have a melee weapon, you can instantly kill the clickers with a strike animation. If you don't have a melee weapon, you will have to use 2 strike animations in order to kill them. I don't know if you can shoot them in the head during the strike animation, because there are times when the enemies can put themselves into animations that allow them to be invulnerable to certain melee attacks. And I don't know if this applies to your guns as well. Like, with the stalkers, for instance, whenever the stalkers push you away and they try to run away, you can't use your melee against them because the melee on this game is a paired animation system, meaning that it is basically autonomous in how it works. Like, the AI has to pick up on the enemy's hitbox, and then when you're at the right distance, you'll be able to close in on them regardless of your distance. It's a system that's utilized in Outlast 2, and it's also a system that's utilized in the older Assassin's Creed games, before Assassin's Creed decided to go for a hitbox-based system with Assassin's Creed Origins, where spacing is actually something you yourself have control over compared to the game. The paired animation system on this game can be very helpful for hitting enemies at range with your melee, but it can also be a hindrance, as I just described, with these stalkers putting themselves in a position where your melee just doesn't detect on them for a couple of seconds. Thankfully, the paired animation system on this game isn't too much of a problem to worry about. In fact, it can be used to exploit certain situations. Like, with the Ellie boss fight, you can get moments where when you're behind Ellie, you can press square at a really long range, and Abby just teleports right near Ellie and just punches her. So, that can be pretty hilarious when it happens. But we're in a stealth encounter right now, and it's a very simple stealth encounter. There's just these 2 runners that you can choose to deal with or not deal with. And then there are 2 runners and then 2 clickers. And they're very easy to get past. And the game's introducing you to the mechanic of using the grass to your advantage in order to be less visible to the enemies. And this fits the whole idea of the analog stealth that this game was favoring. And what is meant by analog stealth is, rather than being completely invisible to enemies when you're in stalking bushes, you simply reduce your visibility by a little bit. If you haven't played the original Splinter Cell, there was a whole mechanic of a light bar system that indicated how visible you were to the enemies, and it worked off a degree system. So similar to that, on this game, depending on your distance to the enemy, then depending on what type of stance you're in, and depending on what type of cover you're using, you will affect your visibility to the enemies, and this will either make it very hard for them to see you, or it will make it very easy for them to see you. So right now, this is the perfect spot to use the prone position because this guy can't see me, I'm at the right distance. And the moment he moves up, I'm just going to push forward, and I'll be able to get past all these enemies, and you still want to remain prone so that they don't spot you, because the grass here is pretty powerful. I mean, it's a really cool design choice, and it definitely adds a new twist to the stalking bush formula, even though other games like Splinter Cell have done something similar to this with its analog stealth. I mean, I think Naughty Dog is actually the first developer to utilize the term analog stealth. So, it sounded like a new concept at the time, but it just sounds like something very similar to Splinter Cell, which I'm really glad that this game favored. And don't treat this game like it is Splinter Cell or Hitman, where you're going to be able to get past every single enemy just without killing them. I don't know why a lot of people try to judge the stealth on this game based on such stupid aspects like that. And Serpent 17 does the same thing when it comes to the stealth on this game. You know, he tries to play this game like it's Splinter Cell and Hitman, but this is not a Splinter Cell or Hitman-based game. This is a survival horror game where you have to use every available option at your disposal if you want to succeed and save your resources, or to just get rid of any potential threats that are being annoying. Like, I don't know where he gets this kind of subjective idea as to how you're supposed to judge the stealth on this game, but it's just something that needs to not be the case. If this game was truly like Splinter Cell or Hitman, they wouldn't put in mandatory combat encounters. They'd just go for that unrealistic approach of somehow the main character just is able to get past everything. When in reality, you know, there's always going to be inescapable situations. And this game favors that option. And just to go back on the whole topic of not killing any enemies, you know, there are times on this game where it's highly recommended you kill certain enemies. Because there are encounters that are questionable in their design, and then the enemies themselves, when you're trying to stealth past humans, for instance, they have some questionable design choices themselves, and it's just better to get rid of them rather than let them stay alive, because they can do some really stupid things. Like, I feel like the worst enemy on this game by far is the turning animations that the humans have. And I'm going to go into so much detail about the turning animations later on in some of the other sections, because the turning animations that the enemies do on this game is completely bullcrap. They have like at least 3 different turning animations that they can do randomly, and it feels like they're just spamming the turning animations a lot while they're just going down their normal paths. And you'll get moments where they do a turning animation that allows them to look behind them, and you won't even be able to stealth kill them at that point. And then, not only that, but the turning animations affect the timing on their movements. So, you know how you might potentially commit to a strategy where this guy moves in one direction, this other person moves in another direction, and it gives you that opening that you need? Well, the turning animation affects the timing on that, and it can be very bullcrap when it happens, so you'll have to take special precautions when it comes to making sure that you're removing that RNG aspect of the turning animation by just moving at a different opportunity, or just paying attention to a particular enemy that screws you the most when it comes to turning animations. And the turning animations can lead to some very broken designs on the AI, and it just makes me question how this got past Q&A, because I have seen moments where the AI has done a turning animation, and it's caused them to walk into geometry, or to walk into other enemies. Like, at that point, if it's leading to a lot of broken designs like that, it really makes you wonder why the turning animations are in this game for the enemies. The first Last of Us, the enemies didn't have turning animations when they were just walking through the environment, so you never got screwed by any moment where they did that. But on this game, it can happen a lot, especially halfway through the game, and you're going to notice it the most when you're in the mall and you're trying to gain access to that boat as Ellie, or during the final stealth encounter. Those are really the moments where the turning animations really get you screwed. Every other stealth encounter, you're not going to get screwed by the turning animations too much. I mean, the turning animations where the enemies look behind them, they only do that particular turning animation, it seems, whenever they're not aware of your presence. If you, for instance, go into combat and then retreat back into a stealth encounter, you'll cause the enemies to go into an investigative state, and during that investigative state, they don't seem to do the turning animation that allows them to look behind. They mainly do turning animations that allow them to look left or right. I would be okay with this game if it was just those particular turning animations, or if they're going to put in a turning animation that allows them to look behind, they need to at least make it so that the point at which the enemies do the turning animation feels logical. You know, you get a lot of these moments where the enemies are just going to be looking at the exact same spots that they saw so many times, and then it just leads to a lot of moments where it feels like they just spam the turning animations. And then when it's leading to moments where enemies can clip into the geometry, or into other enemies whenever they do those turning animations at the wrong moment, it really makes you wonder why the turning animations weren't refined better. And you might be wondering, why not just grab them before they have a chance to go into a combat status? Well, on Survivor difficulty, the conditions for which you can grab enemies and initiate stealth kills is different. I didn't actually realize this was a feature of Survivor difficulty. I thought this was just how the stealth worked normally. But it turns out, on Survivor difficulty, it disables your ability to grab enemies from the front. On Survivor difficulty, you're only able to grab enemies from behind and from their sides in order to do a stealth kill on them, which I just don't agree with if the turning animations are as bullcrap as they can be. Like, if the game at least gave you the option of grabbing enemies from the front, then the turning animations wouldn't be such a big deal. I mean, the only time the turning animations will ever screw you over is if you're at a distance. And there aren't going to be that many situations where you're going to get screwed by turning animations at a distance, unless you're talking about the flooded mall section or the final stealth encounter. But even then, the best way to avoid those distant enemies that do the turning animations is to just observe them and wait for the right moment to move, and it will lead to a consistent strategy every time. So there's no problem whatsoever with giving the player the ability to perform stealth kills from the front. Plus, it just makes logical sense. I mean, you're surprising the enemy, and they have no time to react. So how the heck are they going to be able to attack you immediately when you're going to get the drop on them before they have a chance to react? You know, I just really feel like they should have kept that feature in for Survivor difficulty. And I've already found good strategies for getting rid of a lot of the enemies without getting screwed by turning animations too much. Still, though, I still wish that was just there as a backup. But that stealth encounter just then is very easy. Just follow exactly what I do, and you will get through that stealth section without ever getting spotted. I'm coming into this bank right here in order to gain access to the shotgun, and once you gain access to the shotgun, there's going to be another spawn of a runner and a clicker, and they're very easy to deal with. I always just do the strike animation on the runner, and then Dina, thankfully, shoots the clicker in the face, and I'm able to take out the clicker. But there's something important that you need to note. If someone else makes an enemy flinch, you cannot initiate a strike animation. You yourself have to make the enemy flinch in order to gain access to the strike animation, which is unfortunate, but it's not that big of a deal, because you can just make the enemy flinch again. And clickers already die from 2 headshots, so it's not that big of a deal. Right now, Dina's going to shoot the clicker, and I'm not going to be able to do the strike animation, unfortunately, but I'm able to take out this clicker because the enemies are in their flinch animations for a very long time, which is a really nice design choice. But that's the last area of that big area, so I'm just going to skip directly to the part where we put the gas into the generator, and we will be able to gain access to the Saravina Hotel. And once again, if you have the checkpoint sheet, you'll be able to know which code this is. So the code here is 5345. I don't know if you need to obtain the sheet in order to be able to input these codes. You might be able to input these codes without ever needing that sheet, which if you can, that'd be very helpful. But we're now doing this stealth encounter at the Saravina Hotel, which is very difficult to do stealthily. I'm only able to get rid of 2 to 3 enemies whenever I do this section, and then the rest of the enemies just spot me. But they're very easy to deal with because you have the shotgun, and the shotgun on this game is so good. This is a Resident Evil 4 shotgun, only it actually kills on this game compared to Resident Evil 4. And the flinch animations that it gives you are so reliable. Like, when I mentioned previously in my blind playthrough that this game blew Resident Evil 2 Remake out of the park, I really meant it. This game is such a nice sequel to The Last of Us compared to Resident Evil 2 Remake, as being a remake of the original version of Resident Evil 2. And that game was just such a disappointment, and it abandoned a lot of the philosophies that really defined the Resident Evil game. And when it comes to the shotguns, the shotgun on that game just wasn't very interesting to use. It didn't even knock over enemies, and it was very inconsistent on its hit stun. And it was only ever useful for decapitations, but this game, like, watch this. Watch how good the shotgun is. Look at that. 2 enemies gone. I mean, I made that enemy into a crawler, but you're able to finish it off. But the shotgun has such a wide spread, it is able to hit multiple enemies, and it's just a very damaging tool. I honestly like the shotgun on this game compared to the shotgun from the first Last of Us, because the shotgun on the first Last of Us didn't have that wide of a spread, and you had to be really close to an enemy if you wanted to actually get rid of them easily. But we're now on this encounter right now, which, if you face the corner when you're in cover, when you dodge to that particular direction, you will go around the corner, which is what I use to move very quickly into this spot. And it can also be used as a way to put enemies in a position where you can grab them, but it's very hard to nail. I'm only able to do this successfully in one section of the game, which is a encounter with the Seraphites when you're playing as Abby. And there's never really any situation where I need to use that mechanic in order to hit enemies around the corner using a stealth attack. So it really isn't that reliable in the long run, but when it comes to moving between cover, it can be pretty useful at times. Now, this one right here, normally I have a Molotov for this sequence, but because I don't have a Molotov given the restrictions, I can't do my trick of getting rid of 2 enemies at the start, where as I'm sprinting towards the enemies, I aim my reticle so that when I throw my Molotov, it impacts with the guy running towards me, and then it also hits another enemy that's right near him, and it will set him on fire. And Molotovs on this game aren't really that good. For some unknown reason, Molotovs, whenever they impact directly with an enemy, they are very random in their outcomes. Sometimes it'll kill the enemy, other times they will get stunned, but they won't get killed by the Molotov. And I even have moments where enemies are fully on fire, but they're running. I don't know why they made such weird changes with the Molotovs on this game, but I don't like it at all. I wish it was just like the Molotovs from the first Last of Us, where there's never any of that bullcrap where they got stunned by the Molotov but didn't get set on fire. They always got set on fire fully. There are moments where the enemies have their arms set on fire by the Molotovs or their legs set on fire, and if you let them fully complete their animation of getting rid of the fire on their arms or legs, they will not be killed. If you shoot them during that animation, they will always get set on fire, which is really helpful to note. But the best way to use Molotovs when it comes to guaranteeing an instant kill on the enemies is to aim manually and then aim below their legs, like in between their legs, so that the Molotov doesn't hit them directly and they will always get set on fire. It's something that you shouldn't even have to do. I just hate how you have to adjust for a fault on the developer's part when it comes to how they program the Molotovs on this game. But, not that it matters anyway, because throughout this whole entire walkthrough, I don't even use a Molotov. But right now, I'm trying to put myself in a position where I generate a last known position, and it will cause the enemies to revert back into a stealth profile. And on this game, the last known position mechanic is just as powerful as it was in The Last of Us Part 1, only it doesn't feel like it as such because the enemies move around a lot. They're very erratic in their movements whenever they're trying to search around or just get to different cover spots. So that's why you get moments where the enemies just seem like they know where you are, and they can even spot your AI partner at times, which is why a lot of the times it seems like they know where you are, even though you've generated a last known position, and it feels like Uncharted 4's last known position, which wasn't really that good in all honesty. But when you successfully generate a last known position, you'll be able to get the drop on the enemies easily. You never ever want to challenge enemies whenever they have their weapons drawn and they're moving towards your exact position. They will shoot you instantly the moment they see your visual profile. So don't even try to challenge them. Just move to a different position and get the drop on them. Now, this one right here, it's always important you get rid of those previous enemies. If you don't get rid of those previous enemies, they will affect the pathing on these enemies. The pathing you're seeing right now is always the same, so come over here before these enemies finish their conversation and take out this guy. Then you need to take out that woman over there, and most likely, when you take out this woman with a stealth attack, Dina will be able to take out the other guy that's in the cafeteria. Of course, that's highly dependent upon which direction the enemy is facing when he's in the cafeteria. If he's facing in a direction that your partner doesn't like, they will not go for the stealth attack. But I've taken out the second enemy, and Dina will take out the third enemy, and then there's going to be a spawn of another 3 enemies. They will spawn in after you kill 2 out of the 3 enemies, and they will still spawn in if you try to skip these enemies and go up to where they are. So it's just better to get rid of these 3 enemies, and then you just need to let these additional 3 enemies go on their paths. Their paths are supposed to be the same, and they generally go in the exact same directions. They'll always go from this perspective to the right, forward, and towards me. So I'm just going to wait for this one to pass, and then I'm just going to climb up here. And at a particular point, you are allowed to sprint once you get enough distance from the enemies. But stand up so that you can move a little bit faster, and then start sprinting right here. That soldier, I think she saw the body, so that's why she made a quote just then, but it doesn't matter. These guys, I'm just going to run past them. They'll spot me, but they're very slow to react. You need to use a bottle to get rid of this guy, or a brick. You need to kill the next 2 enemies that come after you, because the problem is, there's a vent that allows you to get out of here, but you can't interact with it when you're in combat, which I think it's a little silly in its design, and I'm unfortunately going to have to wait a little bit after I kill these enemies so that the enemies go back into an investigative state. And I'm going to speed up the video once I kill the second enemy, but the first enemy is coming, and you want to be right over here. This will provide you the best perspective when it comes to understanding whether an enemy's closing in or not. And here he comes. He takes it very wide with his turn, so he's very slow to get over here. And I'm just going to wait a little bit, and he's coming around the corner, so I'm just going to try to shoot him. And he's very slow to react. I'm not too sure where my last known position is, but I would assume my last known position is right near the door, not around this corner over here. So that's why these enemies are very slow to react. But now I'm just waiting for the second enemy to come, and I'm just waiting. It takes him such a long time to get over here, and I don't know why. The enemies down below never seem to come up here. They always try to go into an investigative state, and I shot her in the leg, and I'm able to punish her. And I grab her as a human shield just in case any enemies decide to come, but they never come. They never seem to come, so it was completely pointless doing a human shield just then. But the enemies have lost me, so now is my chance to get out of here. I wish they just allowed you to interact with this, because there are a lot of moments in this game where you can interact with doorways like this in the middle of combat. And I don't know why it doesn't let you do it with this particular event, but it's just very odd. And I've skipped over to this part because there's nothing important to make note of in the hiatus in between that part and this part. So that's why I've trimmed it out. And there are some optional areas you can go to that do contain supplies, but it's not supplies I'll need for the restrictions that I'm doing for this walkthrough. And obviously, if you watch my no commentary version, you'll understand what I did in that hiatus. But there's a trophy on this game for exploring every single location in Seattle, and obviously I don't have it because I don't know how many optional areas there are in this game. There's a lot. This game is more open compared to the first Last of Us, and there's a lot more optional areas. And it definitely adds a level of character to Seattle, especially when in the first Last of Us you were going to multiple different locations. You were in Boston, you were in Billstown, you were in Pittsburgh, you were in Jackson, and then you were in University of East Carolina. I think that's what the location you went to was, that university area where you got the flamethrower. And then you're in Salt Lake City. You know, there's a lot of different areas you're going to in the first Last of Us, but on this one, they've kind of taken the approach that Assassin's Creed Brotherhood did, where it's mainly focused on one location, and it gives this one location a lot more character, and it feels like a very seamless process, rather than going between different locations, like in Assassin's Creed 2. And I think it's a really interesting design choice that they decided to go for. You know, The Last of Us has always been about character, and I guess they're not only trying to make the characters have character, but also give the city a lot of character. And it definitely shows in a lot of different locations you go to in Seattle. You know, it's a very interesting city to traverse. I mean, it could almost be on par with Crimson City from The Evil Within, because Crimson City from The Evil Within is my favorite city environment in a game, because city environments normally are very boring to traverse because it's been reused so many times in games, but Crimson City added a unique spin on the city formula with the kind of destructions you were seeing, and that allowed the developers a lot of creativity, whereas in this one, you know, they're taking the same approach that a lot of games use with the city environments, but I really feel like in this one, the city feels very different, and I always feel like this is something that linear games do better than open world games. I just feel like linear games do a better job at really making everything feel like it has a character compared to open world games. Because I feel like you get lost so easily with the other things that occur in an open world game that you're not really paying attention as much. But I'm going to have to pause on this tangent right now because we have a stealth encounter, and this first part of the stealth encounter is very easy. Just hug the outer edge and go prone at particular moments, and you're going to be fine. And then this part right here, there are going to be two enemies in front of you, and I'm going to wait for them to go all the way to the left, and then I'm going to hop over that fence on the right. I believe in this stealth encounter there are buildings you can go into, and they do have infected, and I didn't actually know this because I never went to these buildings in my blind playthrough, and the only reason I know about them is because I saw Seraphim 17's walkthrough, small portions of his walkthrough, because his walkthrough was just really bad, and his thoughts on the game. I haven't heard what his full thoughts on the game are, but I know they're going to be largely negative. And I predicted that Server17 would hate this game, considering that he hated Uncharted 4, and this game is designed by the same team that made Uncharted 4 and the previous Last of Us. And he wasn't a big fan of the kind of design choices they went for with Uncharted 4, which was very baffling to me. And it seems like that applied to the gameplay on this game in his mind. And not just the gameplay, the story. Like, he's one of those people that hates Abby, and I just don't understand how anyone can hate Abby. The way Abby is developed in this game, she has to have a very similar level of development as Ellie, and as Joel, or as other characters. It's something that cements her place as being a main character. And when it comes to main characters, they have to have a very similar level of character development. In fact, as Laser Z described, she almost mirrors Joel in some respect when she's with Lev. That whole relationship between Abby and Lev is something that is almost reflective of Joel's relationship with Ellie. And I think this game did a really nice job with Abby. I really liked Abby as a character. I almost came to pity Ellie by the end of her boss fight, and I just came to love Abby a lot. In fact, I prefer playing as Abby compared to Ellie, because Abby fights so well, and she has some really fun sections. But just follow the path that I took in that previous stealth section, and you'll be fine. And Seraph17 used a strategy similar to mine, but he took a very inferior path, and he even killed one of the guys. Like, why would you need to kill one of the enemies? It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, stuff like that really bothers me when it comes to Seraph17's walkthrough of this game. He didn't even do commentary, he just put annotations on, and last time he did a walkthrough of a game with no commentary was Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019, which was a game he absolutely despised, and I guess that's why he decided to do the same with The Last of Us Part 2, because he absolutely hated this game for some really dumb reasons, and I didn't want to corrupt my mind with whatever banal thoughts he was embracing in his mind when it came to how he was critiquing this game. Because I don't know if you feel the same way, guys, but have you ever had that moment where you're in love with a game, or when you're in love with a section, or when you're in love with something, and then you hear a bit of negative criticism about it, and it's just lingered in your body for such a long time that when you just happen to reintroduce yourself to that scene again, you don't feel the same amount of emotional attachment as you did previously. And I just think it's a general psychological process. We try our best to dispel a lot of negative criticism, when in actuality, it's almost like we let it subconsciously influence us without knowing it, and it affects our thinking in the long run. It's almost like the kind of thing you'd see in PTSD patients, where you see this with soldiers, after they've been discharged from the military, and they hear a sound, or they touch something, or they see something that triggers vivid moments that remind them of the war. It's the kind of thing you're going to be seeing whenever you try to engage in an activity. An activity that's normally supposed to produce positive effects now suddenly creates negative effects after you hear this bit of negative criticism. And that's why I'm so hesitant when it comes to taking in a lot of the criticism that this game receives, because I fear it might subconsciously influence me, and it'll affect my thinking, and I cannot for the life of me have my thoughts on this game be altered in a way that I'm not in control over. And that's why I only watched a small portion of Seraph17's walkthrough. And I think you can apply that form of thinking with the way people voice criticisms about this game. They hear this kind of criticism about this game that doesn't make any sense, but it's practically implanted doubts with how they're supposed to perceive this game, and that's why they themselves voice the negative criticisms about this game. Using that form of thinking, it's definitely understandable why the superficial mindset you see in so many individuals when it comes to how they critique something in a game is so prevalent. Their expectations were defied in a way that created a lasting impact in their minds, which is why they have these negative criticisms about the game. And I am trying my best to avoid a lot of the negative criticism, because I haven't heard any kind of valid negative criticism. Because when it comes to the storytelling or the characters in the game, it's always going to be subjective. But I feel like with The Last of Us Part 2 and The Last of Us series in general, you have to have an enhanced mindset. And with me, I come from a very deep family. I've been to so many different areas of the world. I've have this very specific form of thinking, and I always try to look at everything from different angles, and I never try to dwell so much on the superficial realm. I always try to look at everything from a deep perspective, and whenever I'm using that particular perspective when analyzing this game, it always comes out as feeling very objective, and I feel like I connect greatly with what Naughty Dog was thinking when they came up with the kind of decisions they did. And I feel like with a lot of individuals, they have so much trouble connecting with a developer's mindset because they don't look at everything from different angles. They only stick to one perspective, and they dwell too much in the superficial realm, and they haven't gained as much experience in the real world compared to what I've been through. That is just something that I feel is very necessary when it comes to critiquing a game. And unfortunately, that kind of mentality didn't apply to a lot of the criticism that this game received, because instead, you have people complaining about some of the dumbest aspects of this game, like with the way Abby looks, and with the fact that Joel died, and with the way the transgender characters are portrayed. Like, what exactly do any of those have to do with the overall experience with the story? I mean, the point where Joel died is obviously a massive point, but people aren't understanding why the developers made the kind of decision they made. But then you have the people complaining about the way Abby looks and the portrayal of transgender characters. Like, what does that have to do with a game? That's like calling a character bad just because one of their mustache hairs is off. Like, what is so objective? Or why does that even get involved in the critique of a game story? Like, what does that have to do with anything? The only people that are going to have such thoughts like that are people that are obsessed with sex, rapists, and people who are probably impotent and don't have any kind of good lives. Such people remind me of the ignorant fan base of the Resident Evil series. It's like how people call Resident Evil 7 bad because it's first person. There's nothing objective about that. That's literally akin to being a picky baby. What does a baby understand about a complex narrative? It's so stupid. I will never understand how these people get involved in the judgment of a game, and then they give this game a 1 out of 10 or a 2 out of 10 based on such stupid aspects like that. And you might be saying, people are entitled to their own opinions. Well, I can't exactly leave them to be entitled to their own opinions if they're going to use their opinions to influence others, and then spread this lie throughout the whole entire fan base. And this is a phenomenon that's occurring in the world right now. I mean, you see this with racism, or you see this with politics, or you see it with any other thing like that. It's no wonder why we elect idiots to power all the time, because we ourselves are idiots. It's just so stupid. I'm sure you can understand why when it came to new Capcom's decision to listen to their fans a lot more, Resident Evil 2 Remake, why I felt it was a really bad idea, because they listened to a fan base that doesn't understand the very core pillars that define a Resident Evil game. At least Naughty Dog didn't do the same thing when they were trying to lay down the foundation for The Last of Us Part 2. They didn't like the idea of listening to their fans in that particular realm of game design, but they at least gave their fans a lot of accessibility options, and if you haven't seen the accessibility options, this game has a lot of accessibility options, and I've been playing with them in some of the encounters on this game, and they're incredible, even though they do take away from a lot of the challenge of survivor difficulty. They almost remind me of some of the unlockables you could get in Uncharted, the Nathan Drake collection, and it made brutal difficulty an absolute joke. And I'm going to go into a lot of detail about the accessibility options in a later part, but Naughty Dog, with the way they approach this game, I think they approach this game wonderfully compared to new Capcom, and this game, I really feel like this game respected the core of survival horror compared to Resident Evil 2 Remake and new Capcom. I really don't think new Capcom understood what survival horror was when they were developing Resident Evil 2 Remake, which is quite ironic, considering that Capcom started the whole trend of survival horror games with Resident Evil 1, but Resident Evil 2 Remake, what a disappointment. I really feel like Naughty Dog became the new masters of survival horror with the release of The Last of Us Part 2. I mean, just the things they were saying in their interviews and in their videos, it really felt like they understood what made a properly designed survival horror game. And this game, like right now, this whole section right here with the TV station, one of the most intimidating parts of the game. It starts off with, honestly, one of the most intimidating atmospheres ever in this game, and this game is definitely scarier than the first Last of Us. And then you have this stealth encounter right here where you're being hunted down by the WLF after they've witnessed the carnage. that ensued in this area thanks to the Seraphites. And it's just so intimidating, but thankfully that intimidation doesn't apply to how the progression of this section goes, because this section is pretty easy. I mean, Seraphim 17's strategy for his walkthrough was pretty bad. He relied on such an RNG heavy strategy rather than relying on patience, and he did not have a lot of patience for The Last of Us Part 2, which I knew was going to be the case, considering that The Last of Us, you have to have the right amount of patience with the game, and you have to go with the flow of the game if you want to get adjusted to a slower paced survival horror game like this. And after those two guys pass, which they always do, I mean, there is a rare moment where they don't do the exact same pathing as you saw just then, but if that happens, just restart the encounter. It works. But right here, equip a brick or a bottle, and then wait for that enemy right below you to go all the way over there. Throw a brick in that direction to distract those two enemies, and then you are going to remain in a low profile over here so that the enemies don't spot you too quickly. And that's all the enemies. But this is a section where you're going to get into mandatory combat. Or not really mandatory combat, the enemies are going to know where you are because there's enemies above you and they can somehow see you. So take this path. If you take the other path, the enemies will be able to shoot you easily. But at a particular point, you're supposed to sprint, which is right now, because Ellie changed her posture just then. And you're going to need to take the path exactly like how I take it so that you don't get shot. So when you get down here, you need to hug the left-hand side, the very left-hand side, to make sure that you do not get shot. If you go on any other path, there is a high possibility that you will get shot by the enemies. And once you get down here, you're going to need to go to the right-hand side of the area so that you don't get shot by the enemies right in front of you. And then we are now going to transition over to the part where we're going to be encountering the enemies here. And you want to restart the encounter because this strategy you're watching right now will not work if you start from the very first instance of this encounter. If you restart the encounter, after you get past that vending machine, dodge 3 times so that you gain a little bit of momentum, and then get over here. This works every single time because the enemies never think to look behind them. And it's all because they're in this investigative state right now. Whenever the enemies are in their investigative state, they never do the turning animation that allows them to look behind themselves. They only ever do turning animations that allow them to look left or right. And it's so good. And we have just gotten past them, and that is the most baller strategy you've seen so far, but I promise you, I will be using equally baller strategies later on. But once I get through this door, I'm going to transition over to the next encounter, and we're encountering a new enemy type, which is the Shambler. And the Shambler is really the only new enemy type you ever get in this game. And the only other new enemy type is that boss, the Rat King, that you encounter as Abby in Ground Zero. But I'm a little disappointed that we didn't encounter any more new enemy types, because Naughty Dog did promise that we would be encountering more terrifying new mutations, but the Shambler and the Rat King are the only new enemies we really come across. And then we get some reimaginings of some of the classic enemy types, like the Runners, the Clickers, and the Stalkers. I was kind of expecting more, but I guess with the lore that's been established with The Last of Us, it makes it very hard to create new enemy types without creating plot holes. But that right there, you have to hug the left-hand side when you're in cover and then wait for the Shambler to move past you. And then once he's far enough away, aim your brick, because when you aim, you move at your slowest possible speed. So it's a good alternative to lightly pushing the left analog stick forward just so you can move slower. And it ensures you don't make any kind of mistakes in your movement. But wait for this runner to go all the way to the right. And when you do a stealth kill on this guy, Dina will kill the other infected. And those Shamblers are far enough away that when you interact with this chain, even if they hear it, they never get to you quick enough. I don't know how this is the case, but I'm really glad that it works like this. And we have done the first encounter with the Shamblers. I remember on my blind playthrough, it took me quite a while to get this done, and I didn't fail this section, but I was struggling with this section a little bit. But that's all in the past now, and there's going to be another encounter with the Shamblers over here, and there's also going to be a couple of runners, and you have to restart the encounter to ensure that the enemies move exactly like how you're seeing them move in this video. There are a lot of encounters like this where it's better to restart the encounter rather than do it from the first instance, because the enemies are in completely different positions upon first initiating an encounter. And it's very simple. There's a runner beyond that pipe, so it's always important to make sure you get all the way to the right so that he doesn't spot you. And then take out this runner over here. And then once you get to the doorway, you only have to hit the door twice, and the enemies will not have enough time to get to you. And this is a very simple encounter. I have no idea what Seraphim 17 used as strategies for dealing with the subway encounters, but I imagine they'd be very inferior because, you know, with his lack of patience, it's definitely clear he didn't devote enough time to this game. But now we have a little chase sequence, which doesn't class as a main encounter in the encounter select, and the encounter select has a lot of big problems in this game, and I'm going to talk a lot about the encounter select later on in the other videos, because it has some very big problems that I don't like whatsoever, and it makes it inferior to Uncharted 4's encounter select system. Even though the whole idea of the encounter select system is a really cool idea, being able to just immediately get started on the encounters without having to indulge in the other aspects of the game. But once you've done this particular sequence and you get inside the theater and just do all the activities involved in getting the theater operational again, this will be the end of Seattle Day 1 for Ellie's section, so stay tuned for the future parts. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.